and welcome to Phenomenon Radio, the show that covers thought-provoking breakthroughs in the fields of UAP UFOs to discover fascinating truths, first-hand accounts, and investigative insights into the expanding confluence of physical and mental exposure to this worldwide phenomenon. Hosted by world-renowned experiencer of the 1980 Rendlesham Bentwaters UFO incident, John Burroughs, and Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. And now, leading off the program, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Lawrence Rockefeller, a brother in the family of David and Nelson Rockefeller, invited a dozen of us investigating UFOs to his J.Y. Ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming on September 14 to 15, 1993. He called it a UFO roundtable. By then, Bill Clinton had been U.S. president for 9 months. The group of us had been invited to talk candidly with Mr. Rockefeller about our various research efforts ranging from animal mutilations, human abductions, crop formations, telepathy, ESP, to government and military policies of lies and denial about the alien presence interacting with Earth. What we did not know was that Lawrence Rockefeller, with the help of retired Naval Intelligence Officer C.B. Scott Jones, had prepared an ad to be placed in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, and a few other major newspapers that read, quote, "Mr. President," meaning Bill Clinton, "on the subject of UFO phenomena, what do you know? When did you learn it? Have you shared it with Congress? When will you talk to the American people about it? The subject is as important as any we will ever face. Don't try to go it alone. This information belongs to the world," close quote. This was Lawrence Rockefeller's velvet glove threat behind the pressures he was putting on newly elected President Bill Clinton to open up the government's UFO files to the public. Mr. Rockefeller knew that then Chief of Staff John Podesta was a big supporter of disclosing the truth of UFOs, and he knew that Bill and Hillary Clinton wanted to know more as well. 2 years went by after that gathering of us researchers without Lawrence Rockefeller's ad appearing nationwide in major newspapers. Perhaps because President Clinton seemed to be trying in his own way to go around the classified blocks of intelligence agencies. On April 17, 1995, Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 12958. That would require his intelligence agencies to allow for the declassification of all documents 25 years or older back to 1970, and that would be provided they did not compromise nuclear secrets or other security concerns. That 1995 August, it appears that Hillary Clinton sat down alone with Lawrence Rockefeller to talk about UFO ET disclosure when the Clintons vacationed at the Rockefeller Ranch in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Apparently, President Clinton did not participate because his science advisor, John Gibbons, wrote in a memo that Lawrence Rockefeller, quote, "will want to talk with you about his interest in extrasensory perception, paranormal phenomena, and UFOs. Soon after you were inaugurated, Les Aspin and Mel Laird referred Lawrence to me concerning the famous Roswell incident dating from 1947, in which UFO buffs claimed a flying saucer crashed near the town of Roswell, New Mexico, and that the U.S. Air Force had classified the entire event, beginning a conspiracy theory that remains today. Rockefeller sought from me the administration's help in declassifying the information and making the whole matter public and open. He knows that we are trying to be helpful in responding to his concerns about UFOs and human potential, and that we're keeping an open mind about such matters. But I've made no secret about my conviction that we must not be too diverted from more earthly imperatives, close quote. That was John Gribben's science advisor addressing the memo to President Bill Clinton about Lawrence Rockefeller's inquiry, wanting Bill Clinton as the new president to open up UFOs. Well, during that August 1995 vacation of the Clintons with Lawrence Rockefeller at the Wyoming ranch, Hillary was photographed carrying a newly published book entitled, Are We Alone? Philosophical Implications of the Discovery of Extraterrestrial Life by theoretical physicist and astrobiologist Paul Davies. Canadian researcher and author Grant Cameron, who produces the excellent history website presidentialufo.com, was able to retrieve documents through the Freedom of Information Act that showed Rockefeller was soliciting help from Hillary's staff on drafting a document to President Bill Clinton in 1995. And the title of that Rockefeller document was, quote, Lifting Secrecy on Information about Extraterrestrial Intelligence as Part of the Current Classification Review, close quote. Whatever happened in conversation between Rockefeller and Hillary Clinton, the Clinton administration did not break open revelations about UFOs and ETs. But last year, in 2015, Hillary's and Bill's good friend and advisor, John Podesta, had been working as a counselor to President Barack Obama when Hillary decided she was going to run for president. On February 13th, 2015, Podesta resigned from the Obama administration to begin working for Hillary and tweeted at 8:55 a.m. that morning when he left the White House, quote, John Podesta at Podesta 44, finally, my biggest failure of 2014, once again not securing the disclosure of the UFO files. Hashtag the truth is still out there. And he copied his tweet to New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd. Then 8 months later, on September 29th, 2015, Podesta tweeted again about UFOs. This time he was congratulating TV actress Lena Dunham about her interview with Hillary Clinton for Dunham's email newsletter called Lenny. Podesta tweeted, quote, Great interview at Lena Dunham, but Lena, ask her about aliens next time and put 2 exclamation marks, close quote. 3 months after that, during campaigning in Conway, New Hampshire, Hillary was talking with reporter Damon Steer at the Conway Daily Sun. He had asked Hillary about UFOs in her 2007 presidential campaign, and now asked her again in his December 2015 interview. He reported Hillary said with enthusiasm, quote, Yes, I am going to get to the bottom of it, close quote. Back in 2007, Hillary told the same New Hampshire reporter that the, quote, #1 topic of Freedom of Information requests that her husband, former President Bill Clinton, received at his presidential library was UFOs, close quote. In 2014, Bill Clinton told late-night TV host Jimmy Kimmel that he would not be surprised if Earth has been visited by aliens since so many planets out there may support life. In his recent December 2015 interview with Hillary, that same New Hampshire reporter Steer asked Hillary about Bill Clinton's comment to Kimmel. She said, quote, I think we may have been visited already. We don't know for sure. Close quote. Then she added that her 2016 campaign manager, John Podesta, quote, has made me personally pledge we are going to get the information out one way or another. Maybe we could have like a task force to go to Area 51 in Nevada, close quote. Keeping track of the Lawrence Rockefeller, Clinton, and John Podesta interests in breaking open truths about UFOs is Grant Cameron from Winnipeg, Canada. He produces and reports the excellent website, presidentialufo.com. And after this short break, Grant joins us on Phenomenon Radio to dig deeper into the political and intelligence matrix that keeps UFOs and ETs tightly bottled up, and what Grant has learned about what was happening with nuclear weapons and UFOs at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge in December 1980, when our host, John Burroughs, was engulfed by mysterious.
For the thousands of wounded warriors returning from battle, Wounded Warrior Project has developed the Warriors to Work program, a career counseling service that helps wounded warriors translate their military experience to a civilian job. These extraordinary men and women bring more than just teamwork and inspiration to the workplace. They bring proven world-class job skills. And to ensure proper placement, Wounded Warrior Project works with employers to find just the right job fit. Talented, skilled, and eager to get back to work, you have the opportunity to hire a seasoned veteran. Contact Wounded Warrior Project at findwwp.org. Welcome home the brave.
Live alternative talk radio in over 125 countries across Mother Earth. KGRAradio.com.
Thanks for joining us tonight on Phenomenon Radio for tonight's interview with very special guest Grant Cameron from presidentialufo.com. To start tonight's interview, here's Linda Moulton Howe.
Grant, one of the areas that I hope that we could start with today on Phenomena Radio is, what is your perspective from all the research that you have done going back into presidential archives about what might actually have happened with UFOs at RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge on that December 26th to 28th, 1980?
Well, I discovered this by accident. Basically, I was aware of the Rendlesham Forest story, but I was lecturing in Eureka Springs, Arkansas about 10 years ago, and I had gone back to where it all began for me in 1975, where for a whole year there was a series of sightings of an object known as Charlie Red Star, and I had gone back to the town to film different spots where I had some very close encounters with these things. I actually had an incident that was almost like the Bentwaters incident. And so I'm taking pictures of different things for my lecture, and I talked to a guy by the name of Bob Diemert, who was the guy who ran the airport in this small town of 2,000 people, about 25 miles north of the U.S.-Canada border above North Dakota. And I had a conversation with him, and I said, Bob, I'm doing this lecture, and I just wanted to know from you, what do you think actually was going on? Why do you think the UFOs were here? And he said, well, you know why they were here. And I said, no, Bob, I don't. And he said, yes, you do. I told you back then why they were here. And I said, Bob, in 30 years, I have no idea why these things were here. I never thought about it. I just wanted to ask you. And he said, I told you, we stood up in the hills and we watched these things. They came from the United States. It's the nuclear weapons. And as soon as he said that, all the bells and whistles and fireworks went off my head. And I instantly knew he was right, because I live just north of the Minuteman III missile silos. And these are two big establishments. One is the Minot Air Force Base. One is the Grand Forks Air Force Base, where the missiles have all been taken out now. But at 1975, when I first had my experiences, there was 300 nuclear missile silos in North Dakota. They had said that if North Dakota had been a country, it would have been a nuclear superpower. There was that many nuclear weapons. These big Minuteman III missiles with, the 10 warheads and all this kind of stuff. And we'd all seen them. And we knew that if there was ever a nuclear exchange, our city, Winnipeg, was the first to go, because every 10th Russian missile would land short and right on top of us. So we knew these missiles were there. We had seen them. And when he mentioned this, and he said, I told you that I had a meeting with an Air Force guy at Minot Air Force Base in a bar on the border, and I told you this story where they had tried to ram this one over top of a nuclear missile silo. And I said, yeah, okay, now I remember you telling me these stories. And so I started looking at the why this had happened to me. And what I had determined was that when I had my sighting, my first sighting was in May of 1975, which was about 2 weeks after the end of the Vietnam War. And the idea that had popped into my head was that the Americans had lost Laos, and they had lost Cambodia, and they lost South Vietnam. And back then, I was actually, my major in the university was political studies, and I wanted to be a criminologist, to study the Soviet government and how the Kremlin worked and all the behind-the-scenes actions and stuff like that. So I was aware of the politics, and I knew that at that time, the major theory in the world was the domino theory, that the communists would just eventually, like dominoes, take one country after another, and eventually they would rule the world. Now, when the Americans had pulled out of South Vietnam, they had taken all the troops with them. And my impression was that the nuclear weapons had something to do with it, because having no boots on the ground in Southeast Asia, if they were sitting there after the Vietnam War in May of 1975 when these sightings started in Carmen, and trying to figure out what are the Russians and Chinese going to do next. Are they going to try to take Philippines or Indonesia, South Korea, and that they might have to use the nuclear weapons in order to stop them because they had no troops there. And so my impression was at that point was that the missiles in North Dakota had been on alert, that somehow the aliens had been able to read the minds of people who were in Washington who were operating these things, and that these missiles had gone on alert and the people didn't know, but the aliens had known, and that's why we had all these sightings. Because when I talked to Bob Demerton in 10 years ago, I said to him, Bob, how many sightings did you have in 1975? And he said, about 150. And I said, how many did you have after 1975? And he said, well, he started telling me about this sighting, and he mentioned a freeway. And I said, well, Bob, there's no freeways here. Where did you have the sighting? He said, in Phoenix. I said, in 1975, you had the sightings in Carmen, 150 sightings. After 1975, how many sightings did you have in Carmen? He said, none. It was as if the CIA took drugs out of the water. This went on for an entire year. And then in 1976, they went away, and they have never come back. There really has not been a sighting in this town since 1976. What I learned later was that in February of 1975, at a town called Nakoma, North Dakota, the U.S. military had put in it was the only operational anti-ballistic missile unit that ever went operational in the United States. This is pre-Star Wars. When Reagan comes in 1988, he starts the Star Wars, putting these weapons in outer space to try to shoot down the Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles coming out of the silos. But prior to that, they had built this place at Nakoma, North Dakota. They had a place called Nixon's Pyramid, which is still there. It's a huge, giant pyramid, which was a big radar establishment where they would try to pick up the Russian missiles coming over the pole into Canada. And, of course, the missile silos were the number one target, not the American cities, because unless you take out the missile silos, you're gone. You got to take out the missile silos before you take out the cities. So we were always the number one target in North Dakota. So when I saw this, that they had put these in, they had started putting the nuclear weapons in, and what they had put in was another 100 over top of the 300 they had. They put in another 100 nuclear missiles, and some of them were 5 megaton missiles, which would try to take out the Russian intercontinental missiles in outer space. If they would miss, then they had these 1 megaton sprint missiles that would be shot up, and they had this huge field of these missiles where they would try to stop the Russians from taking out these missile silos in North Dakota. So what happened is later, and this is only a couple of years ago, I learned this, that in November of 1975, they had negotiated with the Russians to take out the anti-ballistic missile unit And they started taking the missiles out in November of 1975. And that's when the sightings stopped. So from February till November of 1975, that's when they were putting in these new missiles. That's when all the UFOs showed up. That's when we saw the UFOs. And after they took the missiles out, the UFOs went away and didn't come back. So I knew there was this very definite connection between what was going on the north side of the U.S.-Canadian border and what was going on in terms of nuclear weapons. So when I was looking at the Rendlesham Forest story, because I was interested in criminology and what how the Russian government worked and how the Kremlin worked, I was aware of the story that in December of 1980, when Rendlesham Forest occurred, that in Poland, Lech Walesa and the Solidarity Unit had taken over the country, and that they had made a threat that they were going to pull away from Russia. And this was one of the many satellite countries around Russia, and Russia had made a stand that they would not allow Poland to leave. It would be the first country to leave, that if Poland were to leave, then you would have Hungary and Yugoslavia, and all these other countries would decide that they're going to leave as well. So the Russians had put a number of regiments of troops on the Polish border, and there was this standoff in December of 1980 when Rendlesham Forest happened. And they were threatening to go in. Now, we don't have all the records. You would actually need to look at the State Department records and the records of the American ambassador to Poland to find out exactly what was going on behind the scenes. But it occurred to me the same sort of thing as this very unstable situation in North Dakota in 1975, where the Americans have lost the war and they're trying to figure out what the Russians are going to do next. What I immediately assumed is that was why the Rendlesham Forest incident had occurred, because they had the forward-based nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom. And it was not made public. It was not known till later that they actually had these missiles there. It was illegal to have nuclear weapons on the UK soil. And that for some reason, somebody in the government had decided that we might have to do something to stop the Soviet Union from reinvading Poland. And there would be this standoff that you and I wouldn't know about, but behind the scenes, there would be cables going back and forth between the Russians and the Americans with these threats about don't dare go into the country, and that all these forward-based nuclear weapons would be on alert, that somebody would be thinking about this, and that the aliens would know what's going on. And that's why I interpreted that they may have shown up at Rendlesham Forest, and you got these incidents where they were shooting these beams of light down into the weapon storage areas, that they may have actually been disarming these missiles that would be used in this standoff on the Polish-Russian border. One of the confusions is that people who were in the WSA in that period of time, like Rick Bobo apparently was there on what was midnight, December 27th, going into the early morning of the 28th, when Holt was out there with the tape recorder and all of those people. He insists on the record that even though he was seeing a moon size, he said it looked to his eyes like a full moon that was vivid red and blue light in the sky, and he tried to report it to Central Security Control, and they kept telling him that everything was being handled because they had investigators in the forest. He saw lights leave that red-blue large aerial unidentified object, but he insisted that he never saw beams going down into the WSA at that time. However, one of the confusions and contradictions has been that Colonel Holt said that he thought that he saw beams going down into the WSA. So there have been these odd contradictions, and Rick Bobo would have been the closest in the tower overlooking the site. But it doesn't mean that what you're describing did not happen, because we've got 72 hours of phenomena. And on the first night, Jim Pennison and John Burroughs and Ed Kovansak really don't know what was happening at the WSA. Yeah, and that's the thing. You may have people who were there who are under security, because this was not made public till years later, that may have seen something, but because it was classified that the nuclear weapons were there, people would not really be wanting to talk about this aspect of the story. And you and I had discussed before, it was not just the nuclear weapon, the reports of stuff going on in the nuclear weapon area. It was also the fact that it was not treated like a normal UFO sighting. It wasn't just like some sighting at some Air Force base. You had Air Force intelligence and possibly NSA and all sorts of people suddenly descend on this base as if they know what's going on, that this is not just an ordinary UFO sighting. So it's a lot of this is speculation. You'd almost have to go through the records and get the behind-the-scenes stuff, which we maybe will never get. But it's one of a number of incidents, and the Rendlesham Forest one seemed sort of clear. But as I've pointed out in a paper that I wrote that I was going to put in a manuscript, there is a lot of these incidents. I mean, whether you have the Malmstrom case or particularly the one with Eisenhower in 1954, you have a lot of incidents. When you start looking back at these incidents, you see this bizarre nuclear weapons connection to a lot of major UFO sightings that have occurred through the last 70 years.
And we talked a little about the fact that Colonel Halt had said eye to eye to John Burroughs and me at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., around 2009 to 2010, that he knew for a fact that the National Security Agency took over the investigation of RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge within 24 hours. Do you think that would reinforce your hypothesis that that would happen if, in fact, there was interaction between the lights and the beams in some way with all of the nuclear weapon tactical weapons that were on both the Woodbridge and the Bentwaters side?
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that seems to fit in. And I think you had also mentioned that he had asked NSA and they said, we have a file and you don't have the need to know,
right?
Which indicates that they knew that this was not an ordinary sighting. It was being held at the highest level. And that would be the sort of the idea that a lot of the stuff that's happened is classified, and we will never know how many various nuclear weapons incidents occurred. But on the highest level, when the aliens do this kind of stuff, when they shut down Malmstrom or when they do this kind of stuff, the people at the highest level know what's going on. You and I won't catch it for 30 years or maybe never catch it, but they are aware of these signals and what's exactly going on, because only they know what was actually going on with the nuclear weapons, whether they were going to move these things to the Polish border or whether there was discussions about it. That's the kind of stuff that you and I will probably never know what was actually going on in that Polish situation.
But how would you relate what we've just all talked about to Jim Peniston's getting the telepathic download in both binary and telepathic thought that the black glassy craft that emerged out of the blast of white light when he and John were deep in the forest near Capel Green, and he had the impression that these were time travelers, he thinks from 40,000 years in the future, who were facing some kind of big threat or extinction and were coming back to harvest genetic material from Earth in the 20th century, and that was why this craft was there.
Well, my impression of that is, and I say I had an incident very similar to that in 1976 where I was. A lot of this, to me, looks like I always see aliens as messaging stuff. And when I got into the consciousness thing, I came to the conclusion that there was, if you look at quantum physics and the UFO stuff, there really is no time and there is no space. There is no physical universe as we sort of have described it in the Newtonian way. And we know that everything is conscious and everything's alive. So what this message is an indirect message to say, you don't understand time and space. It's to put this out that you've messed up time and space, and whatever it means, 40,000 years or whatever, that's the part of the thing that we tell the story. And it's a very dramatic type story where they want this, multiple nights. They want to be seen. They turn on the lights. I mean, if an alien craft wants to cloak itself, it can cloak itself. It didn't cloak itself at Rendlesham. They were flying around. They were letting everybody see it. And they were playing like this dramatic sort of event where they wanted it publicized. They wanted this story to be told. They wanted it to be like a major almost like a major movie presentation that they would get out. And they've done this in other incidents, like, for example, the Chris Bledsoe story, if you know that one. It's dramatic. It's like one event after another where they're doing things that really don't make any sense in terms of what are they actually doing. It's just they're making these displays that they want people to tell the story. And to me, that's this raising of consciousness. So they're talking about the time and space element. They're allowing someone to walk up to it, as they did to me in 1976. I actually walked up to a craft in 1976. So I'm familiar with this type of thing, that they are, in my impression, allowing certain things to happen, allowing people to see certain things, because they want you to tell the story. They want you to go out and tell the story, and it has to be dramatic so that people will listen to the story. And so that to me is part of that aspect, that they're giving this message about time and space, and that we've got it all messed up.
John, did you ever hear even a rumor or anything in the last 36 years from anyone hinting that there might have literally been a light or a beam going down into the RAF Bentwaters Woodbridge WSA?
Well, I think you can follow Robert Hastings' work, and a major came forward and said that they brought in aircraft from Kirkland, and that there was stuff removed and taken back. So there's an example of, somebody saying that. Colonel Halt then went further and said that he contacted this major, talked to him, and believed what he was telling him was true. Colonel Halt then went further and said that somehow whatever it was in the WSA the ordinance was affected. Some of this came out when they did that nuclear weapons stuff in D.C. a few years ago. And from what I understood, after they did that event, and I've got no proof that this took place, but certain people that spoke certain things about what they said there in D.C., they were kind of given a shot across the bow that they may be going too far. As far as over the 3-night period, there was some radio traffic that went on at certain times when, especially on the third night with Colonel Halt, when I was out there with them also, that these objects in the sky were flying in that general direction of Bentwaters, and there were beams of light that I even saw flash down. That then there was some radio traffic that went on afterwards with the weapons storage area. So, I mean, if you're asking me, can I confirm that something came down inside the weapons storage area? No. Has there been people said possibly there was? Yes. Has there been some people that won't give their names out that claim that something was removed afterwards? Yes. The thing is that I think people focus too hard on sometimes that, well, does that mean that there had to have been a direct beam of anything coming down right on the object, or could it just be something that was in the area that was able to affect it without even having to send a beam down? That could be possible, considering the possibility of the technology, whatever we were dealing with at the time.
And John, doesn't that reinforce one of the rumors that some or all of the tactical nuclear weapons in some area of the weapons storage area was either melted or embedded in something that made them unusable?
Well, first of all, I can't really go into that totally, but what I can tell you is people need to look up what tactical nukes are. And there's been all kinds of things postulating that there are missiles, they were this and that. And that's not what technical nukes are, okay? Number one. Number two, if you look at how tactical nukes would be deployed in the battlefield, they weren't a major issue, period, that would have anything to do with like the ICBMs and all this other stuff. They would be tactically used to stop something like, say, an advancement into an area. And then, again, those would be the small boys in a big boys war if they were ever deployed. And they would be deployed from aircraft like F-16s or FB-111s. And I can tell you this, without going into what was there for sure, that we were not on alert status whatsoever prior, during, or after the incident that would lead anything to believe that there was a possibility of escalation within NATO. And what I mean by that is just simply our aircraft that were there were A-10s. We had FOLs, and some was always deployed forward into Germany, but the majority of the aircraft were still on station at Bentwaters, Woodbridge, and never did leave. So therefore, the speculation that things were getting hot in Poland, I can't deny that, but there was no spin up or anything that we were doing directly at our base that would have led you to believe that there was a major escalation going on during that time frame.
And John, isn't one of your puzzles and so many others that a broken arrow, broken hand, some sort of alert wasn't officially declared on the base December 26th when you and Jim and Ed were out in the forest and they lost communication with you for those 45 minutes. And then on the 28th, Rick Bobo was reporting to Central Security Control that there was this huge unidentified aerial object, at least close to the WSA. All of that put together, you would have thought that this would have been a base emergency under the category of threat to some kind of nuclear weapons.
Well, okay, here's the deal. I can talk about helping hands and cover wagons. Okay, I can go into that with no problems. The initial report would have been a helping hand, unless there was direct, like it could immediately go to cover wagon too. But more than likely, 99% of the time, whatever happens like that would go to covered or a helping hand. Now, helping hands are mostly designed for direct threat to resources on Air Force installations. So a threat outside the wire necessarily wouldn't be, if it even is considered a threat, immediately up channel to a helping hand. You have to weigh on the fact that the person who was in the tower said nothing ever happened directly inside. So therefore, there would be not necessarily a reason to declare a helping hand or any of the resources within the restricted areas where the aircraft were located. So there is a possibility that a helping hand never was declared. But then there's also some people that claim that there was a helping hand even called on the night that we first went out there that were working inside CSC. But helping hands and cover wagons don't directly relate to what you're implying, Linda. They just mean there's a threat to the installation or the resources involving installation. It doesn't have to be, any higher than that. And a helping hand is initially declared to evaluate the situation where then it can be extended, but all that is up channeled immediately to higher headquarters in Germany. Well, Mildenhall first, then it went forward to Germany, Ramstein.
But there was some puzzlement among those of you who were involved. I've interviewed with others, and they've said the same thing. They wondered why there was not some sort of base alert called.
Well, you have to base it on the first night. It was Christmas night into the early morning of the Boxing Day. One of our questions, why didn't they come out looking for us? Okay, that was the question. There's a possibility they did. But again, it was outside the wire on the first night, almost 100% for sure. I don't know exactly what went on, over on the other side of the base, partly because they lost radio contact with us for 45 minutes. But what I'm trying to say is, yes, there was some concern on our part. Why didn't somebody come out looking for us? On the third night, that's a whole different animal based on the fact that both flights overlapped. So we actually had two flights on duty at the time dealing with this. The majority of what went off base. So we're now into foreign policy, as far as going, how far could we push it? What could we do? Should we keep it low profile? And the final factor is we're not really sure what the command post did and what General Williams did. He clearly was in the loop and he knew a lot of what was going on. So there's a lot of things behind the scenes that, it would be interesting to know what really took place.
And Grant, do you have any insight from your work in the archives and doing presidentialufo.com about why they might not have declared something on the base?
Well, not directly, because I didn't do that kind of research. I just sort of looked at all these incidents over the last 70 years where nuclear weapons may have been involved. And so when I look at any of them, whether it's the 52 incident or 54 incident, it's the people in the actual area may not actually know what's going on. It may be something that's taking place in Washington at a very high level, someplace away. And it always comes down to this idea that I always say that aliens are totally telepathic, that they can understand what's going on, not just at the base, but everywhere else. And that if somebody at a high level makes a decision to do something, that could be dragged into it. So, like whether it's Malmstrom or, I don't think they really knew what was going on at the base, but somebody at a higher level in another place may have known what this is all about.
What I'd like to do is have you, Grant, take us through what you've been weaving so well for the last several years about what was happening at the Lawrence Rockefeller level, his trying so hard to break open U.S. government files, and that he was going to try to work through President Bill Clinton and Hillary because he knew that they had interest. But what happened that blocked it? Grant, because it is such a powerful insight to realize that Lawrence Rockefeller, representing that family, in 1993 had prepared that ad to go into major U.S. newspapers that basically saying to the President of the United States from Lawrence Rockefeller, I know that you know, the government knows about an alien presence, about UFOs. When are you going to tell the American public? It is an extremely strong series of words. But the very fact that that was hanging in the wings and that Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, and John Podesta knew all of that, why do you think that Lawrence Rockefeller was not able to leverage this open beginning back in 1993?
I think he was going through protocols. I think he was, as I had mentioned before, this is Bud Hopkins telling me the story, that he had decided, he had seen a documentary apparently on Roswell. He was fascinated with Roswell. And he was determined that whoever won the election, whether it was Perot, whether it was Bush or President Clinton, it didn't really have to be President Clinton, whoever won the election, he told Bud Hopkins and John Mack, I'm going to the president and I'm going to get disclosure. And Bud said to him, Mr. Rockefeller, I don't think that's how it works. And he said, no, I'm going in there and I'm going to do it. I'm going to go talk to the president. So when he went in there, he goes first to Aspen, who I believe worked for him at one point. And Aspen sends him to the science advisor, Dr. John Gibbons. So you go through this sort of protocol. And I think Rockefeller went along with the protocol that you can't just walk into the president's office. You have to go through lower levels as well. And that's what I think the letter was about. He had two things that he was holding over the White House. One was the full-page ad that you read, that every time he wouldn't get his way on what he wanted, he would say to them, okay, I'm going to run this ad. And they would say, hang on, Mr. Rockefeller, we'll do what you want. And they would try to sort of accommodate him. The other thing that he was holding over their head was this letter on disclosure of the ET presence. And he had this letter, and this is the letter that Hillary Clinton helped him edit. He had John Gibbons look at it, and everybody was giving him sort of input on this letter as to what he should say and all this sort of stuff. And it was a letter that he was going to send to the president. And then he would not get his way, and then he would say, okay, I think it's time to send a letter to the president. And then they say, no, hang on, Mr. Rockefeller, don't send a letter. What do you need? And so he was using these two elements to force the issue. But in the end, as I've explained numerous times, he was cut off at the pass, and so was the president. I believe that Clinton knew the inside. He had the top secret material. But he was trying publicly to get the public material for the American people, and that's what Rockefeller was pushing for. So what had happened was they had said to him at one point during the initial part after they had done the briefing to the science advisor, they had said to him, Mr. Rockefeller, if the UFO disclosure is as deep as you say it is and as wide as you say it is, there's no way we're going to be able to get all this stuff declassified. And they said to Mr. Rockefeller, give us one thing that we can do, give us one case to investigate. We'll investigate that case, we'll get it declassified, and then we'll go after the rest of it. So they were actually playing ball with Lawrence Rockefeller, and they were willing to do what he was demanding. And it was at that point Lawrence Rockefeller said to them, okay, I want you to reinvestigate Roswell. And that's why I keep pointing out to people that in 1993, the U.S. Air Force went out and reinvestigated Roswell. They had shut down the UFO program in 1969, the Blue Book program. They were out of it. They didn't have to get back into it. It was a total PR nightmare. The last thing the U.S. Air Force wanted to do was go back and reinvestigate Roswell. The reason they did it was because it was green-lighted, that that Lawrence Rockefeller wanted it. The White House said, okay, we'll do this for you. And so the Air Force had to go back out and reinvestigate Roswell. And as I pointed out, what they did was the preliminary report was given back in 1994. In 1995, the final report was given, and this is the one that says, no, there was no UFO crash in Roswell. It was just a mogul balloon, and goes through this whole hundreds of pages of material. And the report goes back to Bill Clinton. And Bill Clinton makes a speech, and this is where you see this indirect stuff that really it's nothing direct. It's not the president. He can't talk. He's sworn to secrecy. He's got to play the game that he doesn't know what's going on. So what happens is he sees the final report on that it's the mogul balloon. There's nothing going on. He goes to Belfast, Northern Ireland in late November of 1995. And there's a letter writing competition from kids sending letters to the president. The kids that win the letter writing competition are on the stage with Bill Clinton. So he makes this speech, and he doesn't read the letters from these two kids that win the thing. He reads this letter from Ryan, which is a letter that I've tried numerous times to find. The Clinton Library says they don't have it. He says, Ryan, if you're out in the audience tonight, here's the answer to your question. No, as far as I know, a flying saucer did not crash in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. But if the U.S. Air Force did recover bodies, they didn't tell me about it, and I want to know. So basically, he's saying indirectly to the U.S. Air Force, I've read the report, and you didn't talk about the bodies. You talked about the mogul balloon. You didn't talk about the bodies. You explain to the people about the bodies. Explain where the bodies came from, these 4-foot-tall aliens, gray aliens. And that's why in 1997, the U.S. Air Force goes and does a second Roswell report, spent $20 million or whatever they spent on the second one. It wasn't because they didn't have anything better to do or they wanted to investigate UFOs. It was because this challenge by Bill Clinton in a speech that said, explain the bodies. So in 1997, they come back and they basically say the bodies are explained by tall 6-foot wooden dummies that were dropped from aircraft with U.S. Air Force uniforms on and with parachutes and with big placards on them that said, if you hand this dummy back in, you'll get $25. And they said, well, they dropped these dummies and some of them, the legs broke off and that made them 4 feet tall. And some of the fingers broke off and that's why they only had 4 fingers. And they put this report out, which basically shut the door on Bill Clinton and on Lawrence Rockefeller because publicly the president has no place else to go. It basically says, Mr. President, here's the answer to your question about the aliens. And Clinton has to shut up, and he just sort of gives up and stops pushing the issue. The way Lawrence Rockefeller stops pushing the issue is it happens in August of 1995. And according to some of the people I talked to, Lawrence was waiting for this incident to occur because he could get the president away from the CIA in Washington. And in 1995, Bill Clinton is losing the 1996 election. And his campaign manager then was Dick Morris. And Dick Morris determined that the swing voters, which is all you're really interested in a campaign, is the swing voters. You're not interested in Democrats because they're going to vote for Democrats. The Republicans will vote for Republicans. And all you're interested in is the swing voters. And it was determined by Dick Morris in 1995 that the swing voters in the 1995 election were people who were into technology and they were into nature and they were into camping. So the decision was made that Bill Clinton, instead of going to the Hamptons for his summer vacation where he would play golf with his buddies and have parties and meet all his rich buddies, that he would go to the Lawrence Rockefeller Ranch and they would go whitewater rafting and they would go camping and they would go horseback riding because this is what the swing voters were interested in and they wanted to win the election. And Bill Clinton, that was the last place he wanted to go. If you read Dick Morris's report, his book he writes on it, he talks about talking to Bill Clinton at the Rockefeller Ranch and he had to hold the phone away from his head because Bill Clinton is screaming on the phone, "Get me out of here." The only reason he was there because of swing voters, and so that was when Lawrence Rockefeller goes to talk to them. And all the indications we have is that the president wasn't in the briefing. He may have been, but we don't think so. But Hillary definitely was in what he calls this briefing. He had gotten a bunch of material from Stephen Greer, and in the Rockefeller documents, you'll see Stephen Greer sends a letter to the White House and says, I'm on standby if you need material. So they know this is all taking place. The science advisor writes this letter to President Clinton and says, I just want to warn you, we tried to deal with Lawrence Rockefeller. We tried to answer his questions. We did whatever we could, and basically saying this didn't work out, and now he's coming to you. He's bypassed us. He's going to talk to you at the ranch about UFOs. And I think Bill Clinton doesn't show up because it's this plausible deniability that the president always needs, that he's not involved. So Hillary sits down with Lawrence. Lawrence goes through all this material. He goes through it all. And according to Whitley Strieber and other people that I've talked to who talked to Lawrence Rockefeller, nobody said anything. Hillary sat there and didn't say anything. And the next morning, Hillary comes up to Lawrence Rockefeller and says, okay, we listened to you about the issue. Now don't ever bring up the subject again. And that's why Lawrence Rockefeller was cut off. That Hillary, I believe at that point, realized she had already said in 1992 in the campaign that there would be a woman president by 2010. And she's very publicly said numerous times that when she was 12 years old, she said she would be the president of the United States. She'd be the first woman president. So she's looking in 1995 at this issue that at that time was a toxic issue. And she's saying to Lawrence Rockefeller, I don't need this. I'm going to run for president. Don't bring up this subject again. We accommodated you. We listened to you. Now don't bring it up. And Rockefeller at that point just sort of throws up his hands and gives up. And the president is cut off by this Roswell report where they come back and they cut him off at the pass. And because publicly there's no other place you can go, they sort of give up. And what they do is they do this executive order thing that John Podesta helps do in 1995, where they try to force out the UFO documents by saying anything that's over 25 pages has to have a good reason to stay classified. Otherwise, it's all going to come out. And what happens is they figure that the UFO stuff is going to come out. That doesn't come out. But the stuff about putting radioactive elements in kids' cereal and all this kind of stuff, Bill actually has to go in front of the public and explain that they were actually poisoning these kids with radioactive stuff to do these tests. They have all this kind of stuff come out, and a lot of stuff. 800 million pages of documents were declassified by that executive order. And so that's the way they operated it, is you have to sort of come in through the back door to try to force this material, because you can't really say, I know about the UFO situation and I'm going to force it out. You try to do it through secondary channels, and all the passes were cut off. And Bill Clinton is already at that point in 1997, 1996, he's in the middle of the Monica Lewinsky mess, which is Podesta's trying to get him out of, and he's sort of got better things to do than the UFO thing, and he sort of gives up. He's sort of been cut off at the pass. Hillary's running around talking about the Bass Ring right-wing conspiracy that's trying to get rid of her president, her husband, and the UFO issue is sort of put on the back burner, and both Lawrence Rockefeller and the president give up on this initiative to try to get the material out. But it's important to remember that the president did try to help. He did try to get this declassification done through Lawrence Rockefeller and through this executive order in 1995.
And Grant, those swing voters who were people who want to know more about UFOs, who have not bought into the policies of denial, those swing voters knew that the Air Force report, the second one that claimed that they were dummies, wooden dummies with broken fingers and broken legs, didn't match historical fact, because it came out through network news. The news media at least did responsible investigation on that Air Force report, and the news media in general reported that there were no wooden dummies dropped anywhere in Roswell or any place else in July of 1947.
Yeah, and that's why when you look at the material, the more we look at it, the more we realize what's going on. And you can actually see executives that are operating behind the scenes. You see how it's done. It's not done directly where they put the material out. And we mentioned in your intro, you mentioned this fact that Podesta puts out the tweet in February of 2015 where he says, I tried to get UFO disclosure. It was the biggest disappointment. I wasn't able to get it. And he copies Maureen Dowd at the New York Times. Now, Steve Bassett pointed this out to me, and that she was copied. And I said, well, why would he copy her on this? Because she's not really a Clinton supporter. She's a big-time reporter at the New York Times. And it's later that we learn that Maureen Dowd wrote an article in 1997, and it deals with this dummy issue, that she was at the release. And she talks about how stupid this report was, that this actually proves that this is real, that there are aliens here. The article is sort of titled that the aliens, it's for real. So she writes this very scathing article about the second Roswell report, saying how stupid do they think we are, that this actually proves that this is for real, that the Air Force is lying. So she does this. So when in 2015, when Podesta does this tweet, he copies her, because in her original thing, she says the truth is out there. And this is the famous X-Files comment, the truth is out there. She puts it in her 1997 article and supports the fact that extraterrestrials are here and the government is lying. So in 2015, that's why John Podesta copies her on the tweet. And the general public wouldn't know, but when you look very carefully, you can see that John Podesta is trying to encourage her. He's trying to encourage people to talk about this, and it's all being done indirectly, that if you're just watching it without really paying attention, you don't really know what's going on. But in behind the scenes, you can see Podesta and the president are busy trying to move this issue. The same as Barack Obama has done a number of things that indicates that he's unhappy with the secrecy and that he knows what's going on.
Grant, what is in the content of the 1,000 pages of key UFO documents that are now missing from the Clinton Library?
Well, the documents, and as I pointed out, these aren't like CIA, NSA documents that Stanton Friedman always shows, where there's eight words on a page. The documents that come out of the came out of the, I should point out, because it's a little bit confusing to people. There are two sets of UFO documents. The one is the Rockefeller Initiative documents that I got in 2000. I filed in 2000. I heard that a researcher by the name of Bill Laparle had filed for them and had gotten a couple hundred pages. Then I heard that Bruce Maccabee had filed for them, and he had gotten about 500 pages. So when I heard that Bruce Maccabee had filed, and I was already then chasing Ronald Reagan, and I was very interested in the presidents, I filed my FOIA with the Office of Science and Technology Policy. Now, Bill Clinton is still in office at the time, and there's only two agencies, and one is the Office of Science and Technology Policy that is exempt from freedom of information while the president is in office. What usually happens is that you can't get anything from the White House until 5 years after the president leaves. And then what happens is the president has 5 years to use the documents for his memoirs and whatever he wants. And at the end of 5 years, to the day, January the 20th, 2006, the president, the documents from the Clinton Library start to be released. And the way FOIA stuff is released after the president leaves office is that it's first come, first serve. So if you make an appeal or a FOIA on UFOs and you're the first person in the door, it's the first thing that they declassify. So what happened was in 2006, I already had the 1,000 pages from the Office of Science and Technology Policy in 2000 when Bill was in there. I used those documents and all the names, Les Aspin, Rockefeller, Hillary. I know all these people are involved. I know all the names. So I used the names in those documents. And in 2006, when the FOIA stuff starts coming out in the Clinton Library, I file about maybe 100 FOIAs. I asked for John Podesta's correspondence on UFOs, John Podesta's correspondence with Hillary Clinton, John Podesta's correspondence with the president. And I go through all these different scenarios, hoping that I'm going to pull out some documents that weren't in these initial 1,000 pages of documents. So of the first 18 documents that were declassified in the Clinton Library, 11 of them were my FOIAs, and they had to do with Bill Clinton wanting the Sci-Fi Channel at Camp David. And this was, he was fascinated with sci-fi and this sort of stuff. So this was one of the FOIAs I filed. I realized that he wanted to watch some particular show. It was some sort of UFO show, and that he had demanded the Sci-Fi Channel, and they had to an emergency thing. They had to immediately put in the Sci-Fi Channel into Camp David. So I'm filing all these, and that was at the point then when the Washington Post interviews me, Associated Press interviews me, Fox News interviews me, and everybody wants to know, why are there so many UFO documents coming out of the Clinton administration? And the thing was, it was first come, first serve. I got there before anybody else, so I filed all these documents. And it was at that point I started to point out that two of the key documents in the Rockefeller Initiative report, the documents I got in 2000, were these Hillary Clinton documents. The fact that Hillary Clinton had helped edit this letter on UFO disclosure to the president, and that everything that was going from Lawrence Rockefeller to the science advisor, and everything that was going from the science advisor to Lawrence Rockefeller was going through the First Lady's office. She was like the post office. It was all going through her office. And that Lawrence Rockefeller and Scott Jones, when they did the first briefing for the science advisor, had actually gone to Hillary's office after they gave the briefing.
Grant, let's pick this up after the break, both with what was happening right then and Hillary's amazing